There's many chapters towards the end of volume 2 of the Moreh, where he tries to characterize prophecy and explain what prophecy is and also what prophecy is not. But he mentions that Torat Moshe, Nevuat Moshe, the prophecy of Moshe, is something that he chooses not to describe. He's not going to offer a theory of Torat Moshe, and I think the reason why he can't offer a theory of Torat Moshe is because once he does that, he has to address the question of who wrote the Torah. Did God write a book, to put it in the way the cynic Hitchens put it once? Did God write a book? Did he give that book to someone? Did Moshe receive it? But the only chapter in Moreh Nevuchim where he actually turns his back to that promise, that he's not going to address Moshe's prophecy. There's one chapter where he does address Nevuat Moshe, and that is Aleph Nun Daled. 1 Nun Daled, 54. I'm not good in math. And this is one of the chapters that you've read. I want to think about it very, very quickly. Moshe Rabbeinu asks God for two things according to the reading of the Rambam. He asks God, Hareini na et kvodecha ve'edaecha. And he asks, according to Maimonides, a separate question. That is, what's the second question? Hodieni et drachecha. And now Rambam asks, what's the difference between Hareini et kvodecha? That's question number 1. And drachecha. That's question number 2. And this is how Maimonides interprets it. He says, Hareini na et kvodecha is, I want to understand the essence of you, God. To understand God himself or herself. To capture the essence of God. The ultimate lesson in theology, literally theology. The second request is, he's asking him, what are the basic laws of nature? Educate me how you lead the world, and the way God's wisdom is manifested in the cosmos is through the laws of nature. So he's asking him two things. He's asking him for a lesson in theology, and he's asking for a lesson in physics. And what does God answer? He answers no and yes. Lo tuchal lirot et panai is his answer to Hareini na et kvodecha ve'edaecha. Lo tuchal lirot et panai ki lo yireni ha'adam v'chai. Actually, if we think about Moses' request from a Maimonidean point of view, according to Maimonides, in Aleph Samechet, 68, in Aleph Samechet, Maimonides completely internalizes the cognitive observation of Aristotle that the only way to know something is to become that something. And now reading Aleph Nun Daled 154, in light of that, that means that when Moses is asking to know God, what is he actually asking? He's asking to become God. He's asking to break all human boundaries. He's asking to escape his humanity. He's experiencing what Nietzsche called once, I only know the Hebrew translation, kinat Elohim. I would say God envy, where you can't accept your limitations. And God is saying to him, you'll never know me. Lo tuchal lirot et panai. By the way, the pasuk is so interesting. He's asking to see his kavod, and God says, Lo tuchal lirot et panai, which means that maybe biblically the kavod is the panim. Maybe. But after he says, no, you can't, you have limitations, you have boundaries, you can't escape your humanity, you have to accept your humanity, he's saying to him, but I will teach you everything there is to know about this world. Everything. How you'll know all laws of nature, and he says also how all laws of nature are connected with each other. Like the grand united theory. How everything is connected and everything is in harmony. That I will teach you. Aleph Nun Daled is theologically very radical because it says that God is beyond what you could understand, but not only that God is the best you could understand, and not more than that. The boundaries limiting our understanding is nature. We could understand nature according to Aleph Nun Dalet, but we could understand only nature according to Aleph Nun Dalet, which brings us to the following question. The God of Maimonides is the God that's beyond your ability to understand. The God that's beyond wisdom. That any attempt to understand him, by definition, turns him into not God. Because if it's understandable, it's not God anymore. And limiting human knowledge to nature and nature only, by the way, creates the founding paradox of the God of the perplexed. Because Maimonides, more than any Jewish thinker ever, thought that knowing and understanding is the highest human aspiration. Yesoda Yisodot ve'amud ha'chochmot leida. The most important thing, the highest human aspiration is to know. And the same Maimonides that believes that the highest human aspiration is to receive knowledge is the same skeptic, is the same Jewish thinker that more than any other Jewish thinker thought that you can't know. Which creates the paradox of Moreh Nevuchim. He sends you to obtain knowledge knowing that you're doomed to fail. Which leads a lot of questions about Moreh Nevuchim. What is he trying to succeed? Is this the mythos of Sisyphus? You're sending someone to do something that you know he or she will fail? But after asking that question, I want to ask the question that's really on our table. This God that's beyond human imagination, human knowledge, and human language. Is he in any way related to the biblical God that is described through language a lot? That we could imagine him? The only thing we can't do with a biblical God, we can understand him, imagine him, and describe him, we can't feel him. So is there any relationship between the God of Maimonides and the God of the other Moses? Is there any relationship between the two? And in order to think about this question, actually this isn't the interesting question, but I think through this question we could start thinking about the concept of monotheism. So I like to go back to Hartman Cohen and especially to Yechezkel Koifman to understand their description of the biblical revolution. Scholars ever since say it's not accurate. So everything I'm saying now is not accurate. Because I think it's a profound insight into the biblical thought. Koifman argues the following: monotheism is not about believing in one God. That's not what the revolution was ever about. It's not about, we have a polytheistic world, people believing in many gods, and then monotheism comes around and in a mathematical miracle shrinks the amount of gods in the world. From many to one. That might be literally monotheism. That's not what the revolution, the theological revolution of the Bible was about. Hi, Rabbi. I'm so happy you're joining us, Rabbi. We're speaking about the one God now. About the one God now. So if monotheism is not about a mathematical event where you shrink the amount of gods from many to one, then what is it about? And I want to quote a certain version of Cohen, of Hartman Cohen, that monotheism, I'll say this in Hebrew, זה לא להאמין שאלוהים אחד. אלא שהוא מיוחד. מיוחד. I want to think about this the following way. According to Kaufman, the pagan gods, am I saying this word correctly? Yofi. These gods are all over nature, but what they really are is a personification of the forces of nature. We stand in front of nature incredibly impressed, and nature awakens us spiritually. And we experience the power of lightning and the energy of the ocean and the force of the ground, and nature for the pagan person, and not only for the pagan person, is alive. And when you want to communicate with nature, and when you imagine nature, the forces of nature go through, become personified, and nature is alive, and my communication with nature through the gods that are in nature, and trapped in nature, and locked in nature, and are, in a deep sense, nature. That's what life is about. That's what rituals are about. They're about that relationship. Monotheism is not about that saying that there's one God. It's about completely and absolutely separating God from nature. That's what monotheism is about. And what happens when you separate God from nature? What happens then? Well, a few things happen. And the first thing, says Kaufman, is that once the gods are parts of nature, so therefore they're submitting themselves to the authority of nature. They are controlled by the forces of nature, by the laws of nature. For example, the cyclical nature of nature. Gods die. They get married. They have children. The pantheon is one big family. They die. They wake up from the dead. It's the cycles of nature. Gods cannot overcome the cycles. The laws of nature control everything, including the gods, which means the gods of the pagan world are not liberated. When their gods aren't liberated, their men and women also aren't liberated. We're all controlled by a larger force. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. The best way to read monotheism is the following. It doesn't, monotheism, when you ask, what pasuk in the Bible was monotheism created? And Kaufman's answer was created in the first pasuk of the Bible. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, mashma. He is not part of that system called Shamayim v'aretz. He's beyond nature, and if he's beyond nature, he's not controlled by the forces of nature. Monotheism is a liberation of God. He is not a part of the forces of nature. And he's liberated. He can appear, he can leave, he can do miracles. Miracles shows that he controls nature, not the other way around. That's a theological function of the Nis. Laws of nature could break. Now, when we think about this biblical revolution, which even if it's not every pasuk in the Bible, like the critics of Kaufman say, it says, as Knoll says, it's the dominant. Did Knoll speak about this stuff? So why don't you tell me? What? You need a chazara. It's a dominant motif in the Bible, and if it's a dominant motif in the Bible, I want to think about this now, about how now this is where I take the torch from Knoll. How does Maimonides read the Bible? And I think this is Maimonides' observation. I think he's a very sensitive reader of the Bible. And it's the following. If the Bible was an attempt to bring God out of nature, and make God separate from this world, that's a whole new religious world. I want to think about this religious world. It's the following religious world. It's a religious where, let's put it this way, the biblical word that captures the otherness of God is what word? Kadosh. Hagbel et ahar v'kidashto. Hagbel et ahar v'kidashto. One of the signs that Har Sinai is Kadosh is that you can't touch it. Is it separate from you? The holiest word in Hebrew language is that word that we can't say. It's Kadosh, so you can't enter it. You can't say it. You can't touch it. The holiest meter in geography is that meter on meter that we, holy of holies, that we can't enter. The holiest place is where you can't go. The holiest words is that what you can't say. What makes something holy is that it's completely out of your reach. Monotheism is about making God holy. Monotheism is about hitkadshut shel ha'el, but there is another result to this. Saying that God is kadosh is saying something else we don't always realize, and Maimonides noticed this. It's saying that the world, it's secularizing nature. Monotheism is not only saying God is kadosh, it's also a secularization of nature. The paradox of monotheism is that the more God is kadosh, the more nature is mechulan. Monotheism is an attempt to empty nature from God's presence. It's a secularization of nature. By the way, an interesting argument was made by some scholars later on that was due to monotheism that modern science could advance, because once nature is emptied from the mystique, from the mysteries, from gods, nature is just what you see. That's the meaning of secularization. And therefore we can start examining it and thinking about it and uncovering its rules. Therefore monotheism paves its way maybe for modern science. The more, let's put it this way, the more God is kadosh, the more the world is chilon, mechulan. So what? Well, I think this has a lot of meaning, Rabbi. I knew you would say that. That the world is mechulan. No, it's a very... That's a very good question. I mean, I think what you're saying is, so what does that mean for us?
Yeah, okay, for us and for itself. No, I don't know what, you see, I'm sorry, I'm a non-God person. Micah is very much a God person.
Ask God about that.
I don't know what we think we're achieving by saying either that God is a God is Mecholal, or God is Kadosh, or I don't know. What do all these words mean? What does God talk do?
Okay, so Rabbi.
I'm sorry,
No, you don't have to apologize.
Invited me to come.
And thank you. And I'm happy you came. I want to ask from you one thing, Rabbi. One thing, and birshutcha, because zalacha shetalmid medaber lifnei rabo. So first of all, with your permission, this is exactly what I want to talk about. What does that mean? It will take me about 25 minutes to say what I think it means. Okay, Rabbi?
And then afterwards, so what? After it took you 45 minutes. I'm sorry.
Maybe I'll turn you into a believer.
In the deepest sense, I'm an atheist.
What?
I'm an atheist.
Well, if you're an atheist, that's my job to redeem you.
What's that?
I want to redeem you.
You want to redeem me? You want to save me?
I'll give it my best shot.
Okay, where do you want to save me towards? Where do you want to bring me? Okay, God, we met. Micah has introduced you to me. So what? See, in my own view, all God talk is futile and empty. What is important is how I get up in the morning and what do I feel obligated to do. Otherwise, I don't know what all the God talk is about. Can you help me understand it?
Give it my best shot. Because you see, I understand everything.
What? I don't hear you, Michal.
I was making a joke. I would say, I understand everything, so I could. Okay. This is what I think that that Maimonides is trying to do with this insight. And that is that pushing God out of the world by saying he's not a part of nature and still using language to describe him is, without noticing, keeping him inside the world. And that is because you read Aleph Nun Tet. And that is because, but he starts this in chapters that I saved you from reading, Aleph Nun Zayin, Aleph Nun Chet, where Maimonides' observation is that what language does to us is as following. We use language to describe the world. And our mind is trained to use language to describe the world. As a result, if I use language that is there to describe the world in order to describe God, as a result, God is a part of the world. What language does, it puts the world and God in the same category. Let's say I say God is good. Who could argue with that? He's good. So here's the thing. There's that holy woman from Bombay, Mother Teresa. She's good. Of course she's good. And there's the Baal Shem Tov. He's good, right? Baal Shem Tov is a tzaddik. He's good. And I have a good friend of mine that I know he's a very good person. Oh, by the way, also God is good. When I say God is good, he's in the same category with the Baal Shem Tov and one of my good friends and Mother Teresa. Nobody is saying, no, but he's way more good. That's right. When you use language to describe God becomes more of the same thing. He becomes much more of the same thing. But he's in the same category. In order to establish God's otherness, God's absolute otherness, he has to be beyond language. Because as long as I use language to describe God, he's still a part of the world. He's still in the same category of the world. Therefore, Maimonides, in order to take the biblical revolution, its natural, last, logical step forward, God has to be liberated from language also. In order for the biblical revolution to fulfill itself, of separating God from world, it's not enough to say he's not a part of nature, he's also beyond language. And in that sense, Maimonides might not be a good reader of the text, but he's reading the text one step forward. And in that sense, this is one of the most interesting forms of hermeneutics. It's a tough word. Leading to taking the paradox I tried to put on the table to its radical end, meaning that God is so holy that he's beyond any part of language, which means if God is kadosh, the world is more secularized than ever. Nature is secularized, human imagination is secularized, human language is secularized. And this might have dramatic meaning on the human experience. It might. Going back now from Maimonides back to Kaufman. Kaufman noticed, and Maimonides took this also to the next step, that a world where gods are not a part of nature, where the nature is not populated by gods, does not only mean that God was transformed, this revolution, it also means that humanity was transformed. The image of human beings on themselves is radically transformed. And it's transformed because their power condition completely changed. And this is what happens. Kaufman realized like Maimonides and the guide also noticed this, that there is a solid connection between the pagan impulse and magic. They come together. Magic. And magic, as the famous anthropologist Fraser, which by the way, I stole your book once of Fraser. I owe you it. Yeah, well, this is what we're doing today. Fraser describes that magic is one of the most interesting forms of power. What is magic about? Magic assumes a few assumptions. One of them, that in nature, since nature is populated by gods, there's pockets of power within, hiding in the cosmos. And what does the magician know to do? The magician knows how to tap into those pockets of power and channel that power into his life and use it to achieve control. And there's many examples. The world of magic is very sophisticated. There's magia astralit. Astro in Greek is a star, so in astrology, it's magia astralit. When you use the force of the stars, it's the assumption, let's say, that the stars have energy in them, and if I can create, for example, Fraser describes this, a isomorphic, a construction that's geometrically perfect and similar to the star. So if I put that structure at the right time, and it's the right geometric structure in front of that star, I will capture the energy of that star, and let's say that star is Mars. You all know what energy Mars has. I could use that destructive energy to defeat my enemies. Magic is about power. And there's different forms of rituals. There's a dance you do that imitates the result of rain, like frogs, the noises of frogs, Fraser writes. And when you imitate the noises of frogs, which there's always frogs after rain, I guess. So when you imitate the results of rain, that itself, what will it do? That will, yeah, you're doing another magic trick. Yeah, that itself will bring down rain. David Shulman, which explored rituals in other cultures, says, so you do a ritual that will make someone fall in love with you, your enemies die, or the rain to rain, and you do these rituals. What happens? What does happen if in the end of the day it doesn't rain, or you lost the war? What does that mean, that you lost the war? What does that mean? Well, according to Shulman says, what it means is that we didn't perform the ritual correctly. Because the rituals, if we are done correctly, they need to work. Do it again. There's a lot of details. If you manage to do it all again, it will work. Magic is about control. And the magical ritual, if it assumes that gods are part of nature, and nature is submitted to certain forces. If I can control the forces, I can control God. Magic, now what happens in monotheism? Monotheism is a radical shift in human condition, because it means that if God is beyond the control of nature, it means something else. It means that mankind loses control over nature. If nature is now secularized, if there are no secret pockets of power, that there's a secret ritual that will enable me to tap into that pocket of power, the world of ritual dies. Monotheism means the end of magic and a radical shift in the way human beings understand themselves. And when there's no more magic, that means that the sense of power is reversed now. People don't believe that they can control the gods, but they are controlled by God. And the alternative to magic, to the ritual, to the pagan ritual, that gives you a strong sense of control, is tefillah. Tefillah is a part of the monotheistic revolution because Tefillah is not about controlling. At its best, it's an expression of lack of control. There's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that I think picks up very well. A Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, in Traktat Rosh Hashanah, says the following. It's a very interesting Gemara. I returned back to it lately. It says like this. שלושה דברים מזכירים עוונותיו של אדם. In Rosh Hashanah. I'm not one of those guys. סמך זין עמוד ב' אני למטה. Google it. שלושה דברים מזכירים עוונותיו של אדם, says the Gemara in Traktat Rosh Hashanah. And these are the three things, מזכירים עוונותיו, like God forgot your sins and then suddenly he remembers. Three things. One, המזכיר עוונות חברו. That's a nice thing to do. המזכיר עוונות חברו. You're davening in shul and you're telling God about the sins of the person next to you. It's a nice thing to do. Once you do that, God suddenly gets reminded of your sins. Second thing is kir nofel. What happens if you go beneath a wall that's about to collapse? You go right beneath it. Well, that also reminds God of your sins. I can only assume the logic is that why does that remind God of your sins? Well, you're stupid and you're right beneath this kir, and God might think to himself, hey, this is an opportunity. That reminds him of your sins. And a third thing, shemaskir avonotav shel adam, and what's peculiar here, that putting all these in the same category, is iyun tefillah. Iyun tefillah is in the same category of maskir avonot chavero and kira'ua. Rashi explains, and I think he really captured it. What is Rashi says? What is iyun tefillah? It's the following. Habotech betfilato shetitkabil, the person that's sure has certainty that his tefillah will be accepted, lefi shene'emra bikavana. If you have absolute certainty that your tefillah is going to work, then mazkir avonotav shel adam. Now, what's the common denominator of these three bizarre examples? Hamaskir avonot chavero, kira'ua. In iyun tefillah, a person has certainty that his tefillah is going to have control over the world because he did it right. What's the common denominator? Yeah, you think you can control. Yeah, it's a strong sense of certainty. When I say that, when I remind God of someone else's sins, I'm control. What do I assume? God's listening, I'm in control, I have no sins, I'm speaking about his sin. Kira'ua is that same hubris that this won't happen to me, I'm immune to disaster. Iyun tefillah is the opposite of tefillah. Tefillah is an expression of tefillah le'ani kiyatov, of being poor and powerless. Iyun tefillah is exactly what Fraser would call magic. Just to nail this point, because this is important for the chapter we're going, I want to share a memory I have, and then we'll read, and then we'll take these concepts you've been polishing to read the biblical chapter I want to read with you. A memory I have, a powerful memory I have, that gave me my first lesson in monotheism was in '95, I think it was, when Nachshon Wachsman, alav Shalom, was kidnapped. I'm sure you all remember that. He was kidnapped, and I remember Nachshon Wachsman's mother, Esther, asking everyone that Friday night to go to the Kotel.
To what?
You remember that?
Go to the Kotel.
To go to the Kotel. So I remember going to the Kotel, and there was tens of thousands of Israelis there. That was so inspiring. It was such an expression of solidarity, saying Tehillim for Nachshon Wachsman. And I remember speaking to some people around, and we all had a certainty that this has to work. 50,000, 60,000 Jews all over the world were lighting candles. I'm sure you all did also, lighting candles for Nachshon Vaxman. Thousands of Jews in the Kotel saying Tehillim for Nachshon Vaxman. This concentrated energy has to work.
Work where?
To save Nachshon Vaxman, to change God's mind.
Where does it work?
In God's mind.
What?
In God's mind. It's a rhetorical question I'm asking, Rabbi. I don't mean this. And I remember in the Chadashot on TV, Nachshon Vaxman's father was asked by a cynical Israeli reporter that can't even leave the guy alone after his son dies. He asked him, "Don't you have now kfira, questions, heresy?" He was like, "From Jew, Yudah Vaxman." And he asked why? And he said, "So many people prayed to God and you didn't get an answer." And then Yudah Vaxman educating the Israeli society about the fundamental difference between magic and prayer. And I don't think he read Fraser. It was intuitive to him. The reporter asks him, "You asked God a question and a request and you didn't get an answer." And Yudah Vaxman answered, "We did get an answer." The answer was no. The difference between magic and prayer is that magic is about control. You do it, it works. Prayer, like Yudah Vaxman said, you always get an answer. But the answer could also be no. If it's guaranteed that the answer is yes, then where is the power located? Monotheism means it's a shift of power. God leaving nature and mankind losing his sense of control. And I think that's what the Gemara in Brachot says means by Iyun Tfilah. I try to polish two things, a few concepts. One, monotheism as a separation of God from nature. The Maimonidean concept, taking that to the next step, separating God from language. The paradox of God Kadosh means that the world is secularized, and the result of that. The result of that, the world is secularized, so the world of magic vanishes, and human beings' sense of control is completely transformed. After establishing that, I think we're almost ready to read the chapter I want to read with you, the text I want to read with you. But there's one more thing we have to do before we dive into this text, into Melachim Bet, chapter 5. And that is, right, this is a chapter dealing with tzarat, and I just want very, very quickly to understand what tzarat biblically is about. Now, we all know how Chazal see tzarat. What is tzarat according to Chazal? That's right, it's motzi shem ra. It's the avon of Lashon Hara, which is a beautiful reading of Chazal. Because I guess Lashon Hara's, there's a reading of Rabbi Nachman that Lashon Hara is about seeing someone externally. That's what Lashon Hara is about. So obviously, what is the tzarat? The tzarat is a disease that hits you externally. It's midah keneged midah, with a beautiful reading. And there's a lot of psychology into this. Psychology, because tzarat only happens, that human tendency to Lashon Hara only happens when there's interaction between human beings. There's that temptation to enjoy a 5-minute high by putting someone down. You feel a little bit, you're up, that evaporates, and that seduction of Lashon Hara is there. And since it only happens in interaction with other human beings, what's ki'ilu the therapy, the biblical therapy to Lashon Hara? You have to leave society for 7 days and 7 nights. Badad yeshiv michutz lamachaneh. Hitbodedut is the therapy to that tendency to measure yourself in light of others, in comparison to others. It's an attempt maybe to enable someone to see your value, not in comparison to society, but that's what might happen in hitbodedut. To see your value just through yourself. These are nice readings, mamash nice readings. We could talk about this a lot. I'm not sure that this is how the Bible understands tzarat. If we think about the tzarat of the Bible, so we find, and I'm going to do this very quickly because time is mamash a limited resource unless we'll perform a magic trick. let's just go quickly. Yerovam ben Nevat, what does he do? He separates. Yerovam ben Nevat's famous sin was his tremendous political success. After Shlomo dies, he separates the northern kingdom from the southern kingdom. He establishes a new kingdom, Mamlechet Israel. But not only does he want political independence from Yehuda, he does more than that. He does much more than that, and he's very successful. What does he do? He doesn't only change the structure of power, he also creates new holy places. The Chalufat Yerushalayim is in Beit El and in Dan. Beit El is the south of the 10 tribes kingdom. What? Yeah, Dan is in the north. So he creates two holy places, an alternative to Jerusalem. But not only does he create, in his attempt to radically reform Judaism, new holy places, he also creates new sacred time. Our sacred time is the Chodesh HaShvi'i. In Yerovam ben Nevat's new religion, what's the new sacred time? The Chodesh HaShmini. And then he does another thing. Not only does he change sacred place and sacred time, there are also sacred people. So he creates a new holy tribe. Not Shevet, not the old school Levim, but people he chooses from all over to serve in his temples. So it's not only a political revolution separating from the south, it's a religious revolution founding a new religion for, according to the biblical writers, political purposes. And he's so successful politically, and he's so successful religiously, he appoints himself to be the priest in the temple of Beit El of his new religion. It's a long story, let's just tell it short. As a result of all this, he reaches out with his arm, and it gets stuck. He has tzarat. Another example of tzarat is Uzziah. Uzziah was so successful, extremely successful, he also starts believing that he himself is a priest. He gets tzarat, this time on his metzach, on his forehead. That's how you say it? On his forehead. Doesn't make sense, on his forehead. You have Miriam. Miriam has tremendous spiritual success. She has prophecy. But she thinks that her prophecy is in the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. She gets tzarat. What is tzarat about in all cases? It's always about the same thing. It's always about the same thing. It's about the following. You're successful. Tzarat is the disease of winners. You're successful. And as a result of your success, you start believing that you're something more than you really are. And Miriam has prophecy. She thinks she's Moshe Rabbeinu. Yerovam is a king. He thinks he's a priest. Uzziah is so successful militarily. He thinks he's a priest also. Tzarat is exactly what the Greeks called hubris. And the dynamic of hubris is the following dynamic. Hubris is when you're the victim of your own success. And this is how you're successful. And then you're blinded by your success. And I love that metaphor because it means you can't see. And what you can't see, you're blinded by your success, you can't see your vulnerabilities. You can't see your boundaries. And what happens as a result of your success, you start developing an inflated image of your power. You say, Dimui has to be self-image. You have an inflated self-image. The image of your power is much greater than your real power. And then you make decisions not in light of your real power, but in light of the inflated image of your power. And as a result, you lose all your power. That's how the Greeks understood that you're doomed to fall. Why does Napoleon invade Russia? His decision to invade Russia wasn't a calculation in light of his real power. It was he was so successful, he didn't see the boundaries of power, and he made a decision in light of the image, the inflated image of his power, and as a result, you lose all your power. Tzarat happens. Tzarat is the biblical form of hubris, when you have success, and then you don't see the boundaries of your power. Tzarat is when you think that you're more than who you are. Meaning tzarat is The Bible also in different places knows how to take care of not identifying with your failure, not letting your failure determine who you are. Not the fact that you failed doesn't mean that you are a failure. Tzaraat is the opposite. What happens when you're successful? You start thinking that you are. Success is not something that happened to you, it's something that you are. You can't see that you're bound. And in light of that, by the way, this is not my chidush, it's written already. But in light of that, now I think we're ready to read the chapter I want to read carefully with you. So now that we polished our concepts from an abstract point of view, and we also know what tzaraat is, I think we're ready to read a chapter that challenges Koifman, Rambam, Herman Cohen, me. It challenges everything. It's the story of Elisha where he performs a radical magic trick. And I want to read this chapter, and in light of this, to think again about monotheism and power. I assume you all read it, nachon? So we could larut et zamahir, because I realize, what's our time condition? Okay, so we still have 40 minutes to go, and I'm sure you guys want to ask questions. So. What?
Far away from any God.
Yeah, but there's first of all, I know I own the power, but still, there's a psychology of someone that wants to ask a question, you can't listen when so we'll have to do therapy also. Right.
May I ask you? I'm sorry you invited me.
You're sorry?
I'm sorry you invited me to sit into your class. I find all God talk empty, meaningless. I don't know what the heck you're talking about. Leave God alone, whatever he is. What I know is that I put on tefillin in the morning, and that when I sit down to eat, I make a bracha. I understand those things. I don't understand a word you're talking about. Mamash, I try to listen with respect. In the deepest sense, I challenge all God talk. To me, the essence of Judaism is not God, but halacha. Why? Because halacha at least gives me some path to my own growth, to what I should strive to achieve. Who is God? I don't know what all that stuff means. I mean, what the language is. God is essentially important if living is essentially important. If Shabbos is essentially important. Living a life in a certain pattern is what makes the language of God important. I'm a deep believer on one hand and a deep atheist on another. Like people come over to me and say, what do you want? I don't know what I want. I could describe a way of life. And what that way of life does is an interesting question. The reason why prayer is so meaningless in most of our synagogues, because people don't know the heck what we're talking about. The language seems totally empty. What do we want? So thank God for Kalbach. He rescued us from utter boredom. So Micha, I'm asking you, help me. You're a very deep spiritual person, and I mean it seriously. Where am I supposed to go? When I want to be religious, what are you telling me? What does it mean to become religious? What does a rabbi do in his congregation? What does he want? What are all those words repeated 1,000,000 times? Does it mean that...
I just, first of all, Rabbi, I am very happy that you came.
What?
I am very happy that you came.
You're very what?
I am, as opposed to you, very happy that you came. Yeah, I just want to say, I think you ask, what does it mean to be religious? This is the point I'm trying to make. It's the following point, that religion at its worst gives you an illusion of certainty. Religion at its best enables you to accept your lack of certainty.
Except what?
Religion at its best enables you to accept your lack of certainty. And I'm not saying that there are religions that are about certainty and there's religions that cultivate acceptance of lack of certainty. I would say every religion has both impulses. I even have a feeling that it's more than that, Rabbi, that in every religious moment, in every religious event, we have those both impulses in competition. Is this an attempt to control, to make uncertainty vanish? Or is it a part of us accepting our boundaries? And that's what monotheism might be about at its best, meaning accepting lack of certainty, lack of control. And these are two religions that I think exist simultaneously in any religious event, in any religion.
So you're telling me the fundamental
Thanks a
aspect,
lot.
I wake up in the morning and I want to be frum. I just heard Micah Goodman's lecture. And what I'm supposed to feel is lack of certainty. I don't know. And the more I don't know, the more religious I feel. So who the heck has to start off from the beginning? What does negative theology do? I mean,
What negative theology does, I understand. And I'll just make this last remark because I want to dive into the chapter that we want to read. But I think this theological conversation might be constructive. What negative theology does, if we think about the paradox planted in the heart of the God of the perplexed. So we're thinking about the Rambam promoting us to learn and to obtain knowledge of God. Da et Eloi avicha ve'avdeu. Know God and worship Him. But he asks you to do that knowing that you can't know Him. So I think the result of, like the book you called, A Philosophic Quest, and I think Maimonides would name your book, Rabbi, The Quest for God. A philosophic quest is a quest for God. The quest for God doesn't take you to God. It takes you to hit the boundaries of your understanding. But I think according to Maimonides, it's therapeutic to hit the boundaries of your understanding, because when you hit the boundaries of your understanding, you hit a wall, there's an experience there. And the experience is that it's a wall, it's a border. And that by definition means that there's something beyond that border. So I think experiencing ununderstanding is experiencing God. It's experiencing limitation is experiencing that there is something beyond that limitation. That's the religious experience of Ahavat Hashem according to Maimonides. Ve'ach yadech le'avato v'yirato, says Maimonides in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, בשעה שיתבונן האדם במעשיו ובוראיו הנפלאים והגדולים ויראה מעין חוכמתו שאין ערך ולא קץ, meaning when you try to understand and you realize that you can't understand, מיד ומתהווה תאווה גדולה לידעת השם הגדול. That creates a yearning for what's beyond. But in order to cultivate a yearning for what's beyond, you have to experience that there's something beyond. And if you can understand it, it's not beyond you, it's an extension of you. Boundaries means that our mind is an extension of us, but when our minds reach a border, then we're experiencing a yearning for what's beyond you. That's why I think negative theology, Rabbi, creates a certain kind of religious experience, but it's not the religious experience that we have the joy of certainty, but the awe of uncertainty. It's what Rudolf Otto called the mysterium tendrum, the nominosi.
The awe of uncertainty?
The uncertainty, I think, could lead us to postmodern nihilism and cynicism, or it could be leveraged to Ahavat Hashem. I think the role of Maimonides in our life is not to discover uncertainty, but the question is, how do we leverage uncertainty? Where do we channel uncertainty? What kind of a life does uncertainty create? If it's okay, we'll move to the Perek. בסדר? Okay. ונעמן, שר צבא מלך ארם. Are you all with me? Yeah, good. ונעמן, שר צבא מלך ארם, he is the general of the kingdom of Aram, which was an important empire. היה איש גדול לפני אדוניו ונשוא פנים. נשוא פנים means in the Bible, נשיאות means, yeah, he's beyond anyone else. כי בו נתן אדוני תשועה לארם. We know something else about this person. He's נשוא פנים, he's beyond everyone else, and he's a winner. כי בו נתן אדוני תשועה לארם. He's victorious. He won wars. והאיש הגיבור חיל מצורע. In light of everything we read already, so you know what I want to do with this pasuk? I want to read it in a stronger way. It's not that he was a winner and he's a mitzorah. How do I want to read this? Exactly, it's the result. So he wasn't before. He was. This is the information we have. It's not surprising that he's a mitzorah. האיש היה גיבור חיל מצורע. Okay, since we a little bit ran out of time and you read this, I want to skip to what I think the strategic psukim are. You all read it, נכון? Okay. Like Israelis say, sababa. So they don't know what to do. They can't find any magician that will cure him in Aram. So there's a rumor that there's a magician in Israel. Israel meaning the northern kingdom. I'm skipping to verse 6. Vayavet sefer el melech Israel. So the king of Israel gets the sefer, meaning the letter that says, please cure my general Naaman לאמור. ואתה גיבור הספר הזה לך, הנה שלחתי אליך את נעמן עבדי ואספתו מצרתו. אמן פסוק ז' now. ויקרא קרוא מלך ישראל את הספר ויקרא בגדיו. ויאמר האלוהים אני להמית ולהחיות, כי זה שולח אליי לאסוף איש מצרתו, כי אחדאו נא וראו מתענהו לי. Now we have another insight of how biblical people understand the biblical tzarat. Tzarat is like death. האלוהים אני להמית ולהחיות. And tzarat is like death, therefore curing tzarat is tchiyat hamitim. How do you say resurrecting the dead or the death? The dead. That doesn't make sound. Okay, sababa. It's like resurrecting the dead. And the only person that can do that is God. Therefore, any person that thinks that he could cure tzarat, can resurrect the dead, he is God. Ha-Elohim ani la'amit ve'la'achayot. And the only conclusion that the king of Israel is that since the king of Aram knows that he can't do this, so what is he doing here? He's asking him to do something that will fail, and then he has a casus belli, then he can start a war with him. So he panics. Let's think about this a little bit more. If you have to think that you're God in order to cure tzarat, I would say the natural conclusion is that if you think you can cure tzarat, what does that mean? What do you deserve? Tzarat. That is a tzarat deserving thought, the thought that you can cure tzarat, that you're a God that can להחיות את המתים. פסוק ח' ויהי כשמוע אלישע איש האלוהים כי קרע מלך ישראל את בגדיו. וישלח אל המלך לאמור למה קרעת את בגדיך יבוא נא אליי וידע כי יש נביא בישראל. Elisha seems like I'll do it, no problem. פסוק ט' ויבוא נעמן. Now this is where the drama begins. Are you on verse 9? ויבוא נעמן בסוסו וברכבו ויעמוד פתח הבית לאלישע. So the general comes and he's standing in the entrance to the house of Elisha, and I guess there's stairs because later on they use the term of yarad. So he's beneath his house of Elisha. וישלח אליו אלישע מלאך, Elisha sends his servants, לאמור הלוך ורחצת 7 פעמים בירדן וישוב בזרעך לך.
See, in my world, I
ותהר.
start this way. I say, here's a book which tells
Just
a
take the
story.
microphone.
What? Oh, I'm sorry.
So here's what Elisha is doing to this proud general. What is he not doing? He's not going to see him himself. He's sending his servant. What is he not doing? He's not curing him. He's commanding him to do something. Later on we'll say it's a triple humiliation, but now we're experiencing it as a double humiliation. He's not going to see the great general. He's sending his servant, and he's not curing him. He's commanding him, go to the Jordan and titvol 7 פעמים. Obviously, how does not... Now this he's telling a person that we know his problem is inflated pride. Obviously, ויקצוף Naaman is upset. וילך. ויאמר, now he shares his expectation. הנה אמרתי אליי יצא. What did this proud person think was supposed to happen? Elisha was supposed to come out and greet me, not send his servant. אליי יצא. יצא יצאו. ועמד, וקרא בשם אדוני אלוהיו, והניף ידו אל המקום, ואסף המצורע. What did he expect him to do? To come out and then to do a magic trick and to cure. And now he's adding a third humiliation. הלטו מנה ופרפר נהרות דמשק מכל מימי ישראל. A geographic humiliation. הלא ארחץ בהם בטהרתי ויפן וילך בחימה. Listen, the Jordan River, before this text, if you think of the Jordan River, it's not a very impressive thing. I mean, emptied from memories and this kind of stuff. If you had the Jordan River in North America, it probably wouldn't even have a name. It's like that place. It's a pedal, it's nothing. And there's rivers in the world. You have the Rhine and the Thames and the Mississippi and the Nile, and here we have the Jordan. So he's humiliated because he didn't come out to him, and he's humiliated because he didn't cure him, but he told him what to do, and nobody likes people telling him what to do, especially if that's your problem. And also there's a geographic humiliation here, and his ego trip doesn't allow him to accept the orders from a person that even come out to him and tell him to go to some puddle and litvol 7 times. ויגשו עבדיו וידברו אליו ויאמרו, אבי דבר גדול הנביא דיבר אליך, הלא תעשה, ואף כי אמר עליך רחץ וטהר, וירד ויטבול בירדן 7 פעמים כדבר איש אלוהים, וישב בשרו כבשר נער קטון ויטהר. What we have here is a clash of cultures and a clash of expectations. He expected to receive a magical treatment. But Elisha didn't give him magical treatment, he gave him something else. He told this person that his problem was his inflated ego. The following: if Elisha can swallow his large ego, obey to a commandment of a slave, and go to the Yarden and itvol 7 פעמים, if he could overcome that. I meant Naaman, sorry. If Naaman can overcome that and accept the order of a slave and be humiliated by the prophet and go to the Yarden and follow orders, if he could swallow all that, he's not only shaking off the tzarat, what is he shaking off? The psychology that created the tzarat. This is a clash of cultures because what Naaman expected to get was magic, but what he received was therapy. Who cured Naaman? Naaman. If Naaman could do, he has to overcome the origins of his disease. Now Naaman, now here's the interesting thing. Naaman now goes back to אלישע, וישוב אלישע אלוהים הוא וכל מחנהו ויבוא ויעמוד לפניו והנה ידעתי כי אין אלוהים בכל הארץ כי בישראל ותקח מהברכה מאת עבדך. Now he wants to pay for the service, and now why can't Elisha accept a payment for the service? Why can't he accept a payment for the service? Because if you accept a payment for the service, what are you declaring? I cured you. Here's the paradox. If he'll take the payments, he's declaring that he cured Naaman from tzarat, therefore, I guess he deserved tzarat. This is exactly what happens. Gehazi, the servant, the corrupt servant, feels like they're losing. So what does Gehazi do? So Gehazi runs to the Naaman and he tells him, listen, the prophet changed his mind and we want a lot of money now, and he gives him the money and he comes back and Elisha notices that he took payment for curing Naaman, and then the final pasuk of this beautiful chapter is what? He says to him, "V'tzarat Naaman tidbak becha bezacha leolam v'yetze milfanav metzora kasheleg." Tzarat Naaman we transferred to you. Meaning what happened here is that once Naaman wanted to take credit for curing tzarat, he received tzarat, the same tzarat. Tzarat Naaman. I mixed up words again? That's right. Yeah, Gehazi, when Gehazi thought he deserves credit for curing tzarat Naaman, he's going to get tzarat Naaman. By the way, I just want to notice something interesting, that who are the people that told Naaman to overcome his ego? The Avadim. And who's the person who had the ego on the other side? The same Evid. I don't know what this means, but this is an observation that I just heard last week by one of the lay leaders. I think it's an interesting thing, the role of the Avadim here. I didn't develop this yet. Nachon. The person had... מה זה foil? I want to say one last thing and then open this whole thing for all your questions. We started with Chavakuk in the morning. Your attempt to worship your own power. I think the most interesting, and then monotheism is about God is beyond this world, then the real power is beyond our power, therefore is beyond our control. Therefore monotheism is about internalizing and accepting your lack of control, lack of power. We saw here a great example, how a chapter that's key about a magic trick, it's actually about accepting, it's not Elisha. The whole point of this chapter is that Elisha realizing that his work is not an expression of power, but recognizing lack of power. In the 20, I want to take this conversation to its, I mean, there could be many conclusions and every one of you take it wherever you want. But there's one place, one thought that I want to offer is when we think about worshiping our own power and the temptation, the magical temptation of religion being about an illusion of certainty, and mitzvah being about an act of control. And that religious temptation, how monotheism is a challenge to that religious temptation, trying to create an alternative religion where God is separate, therefore this world is empty from any pockets of power, and internalizing monotheism is accepting your lack of control. What does this mean about how we do other forms of power, and especially politics? I want to make one thought now and then open it for your questions. The 20th century, and not only the 20th century, but the 20th century, to a radical extent, was a century where we started worshiping ideas. It's the worship of ideas. There's certain ideas that people believed in them. Now, what does it mean to believe in ideas? To believe in the idea, there's two things, I think. Worshipping an idea, I think, has two characteristics. And if it has both, I think we could say it's a worship of an idea. One, that you think the idea is perfect. And two, you believe that we implement that idea, the world will be redeemed. If you think an idea is perfect, and by implementing the perfect idea, the world will be perfect, that is worshiping an idea. That's having faith in an idea. Now, it doesn't matter if it's communism or Maoism or fascism or Nazism or all the great ideologies, or other isms, by the way. Great ideology of the 20th century, that once I believe, by the way, I'm not advocating here against ideas. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, believing that an idea has redeeming power, that if you implement that idea, the world will be transformed, like many people did and still do around the world. But this was a dominant idea in the 20th century. There's only one thing we forget when we think about worshiping an idea. And that is that all these ideas were created in the minds of human beings. There's ideas, human beings, some of them as individuals, some as groups. Usually after some generations of conversation, a certain idea is created. And if you admire that idea, you're believing the following. You believe that an idea that human beings created is a perfect idea, and if human beings will implement it, the world will be redeemed. That's maybe a modern form of chavakuk, of worshiping yourself, your power, your intellectual power. Maybe what monotheism really is about. Monotheism is about not taking yourself too seriously. Monotheism is about having a sense of humor. Jerry Seinfeld was in Israel a few years ago. I'm serious. And there was an interview in Haaretz, in Musaf Haaretz, and my wife and I enjoyed very much. Because the interviewer asked Jerry Seinfeld if his humor is Jewish. And Seinfeld asked, "What are you talking about? Is pizza Italian?" Meaning he answered him, "It's not that my humor is Jewish." He said, "Humor is Jewish," but still, and Ruth Weiss now, if you know, is writing about this. I had a conversation with her. There's still humor that's not Jewish. And it's the following distinction. Ruth Weiss is going to come out with a book. She's going to come out with a book about this. Ruth Weiss is from Harvard. She's a Yiddish professor, Davka. That if I tell a joke and I'm mocking someone else, that's not a Jewish humor. That's how Goyim do humor. By the way, Israeli TV is filled with Goyim-type humor. But when I tell you a joke and everybody laughs, but the joke is not me, that's Jewish humor. I'm just making the observation, it's about not taking yourself too seriously. And here, the movement from modernism to postmodernism is many times explained the following, that in modern times he believed in the redeeming power of ideas. In postmodern times, we lost any faith in ideas altogether. And the attitude I'd like to introduce now, and with that to open all this to conversation, is that being skeptical about my own ideas, not believing that what I thought is a redeeming idea, not taking yourself too seriously, having a healthy skepticism, healthy sense of humor about what you created, means noticing your vulnerabilities, noticing your boundaries. That doesn't mean that ideas don't have meaning. It only means that they don't have absolute meaning. Between modernism and postmodernism, I think the Bible might be able, not in its pshat, not when we read the Bible, when we take the biblical logic one step forward, I think the biblical model might offer a good, healthy middle ground for mankind that's struggling, that wants ideas to be inspired from, but at the same time doesn't want to be blinded by those ideas. בסדר. בבקשה. Rabbi, there's some... What? Again, what?
But you don't mind if I share some of my own convictions?
Go ahead.
How do I deal with the skepticism and the atheism which I seem to have articulated? How do I develop my own religious universe? You don't mind, Michael, for an old man to speak. I open up the Bible, and in that Bible, there's a story about a people called Israel, and about some ultimate reality called God. Now the question is, why read it? Why read the book? And for me, I open up the book and I find it captivating. I find it alive with metaphors, with stories, with midrashim, which are a whole history of responses. True? I don't know. It doesn't interest me if it's true. It is there. There is a book called Torah. And in that Torah, there's some major figures. Abraham, the Avos, Nevi'im, and another figure called God. And he's also in the story. Is it true? That's not the ultimate issue. The issue is that he is in the story. And he plays an important role in the story. And what you do as rabbis is you read that story with your congregants to see if that story has any vitality to it. And therefore, you teach Torah, mean you teach the story. You're not out to teach truth. Is it true? I don't know what you mean by that question. I know that for thousands of years, people have read this book and responded to it. What is alive to me is the response of generations in which the language in this story seems to awaken them to something important.
That's
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I'm saying it, no. It's very
Now,
important.
I can only say at age 85, the Alta Kaka is trying to live honestly. So what I say to myself, here's a book, interesting book, with many different people in it. And one of those people are God. How does he appear in the story? And my task is to make his life in the story alive, challenging, important.
Rabbi, you're also you're challenging all of us.
What?
You're challenging all of us because you have this tendency to be absolutely dugri, what Israelis call dugri, to say things as they are, to say things with the way only you could say them.
That's why I asked you.
I know, because I like making things like, nice. And you say them as they are. So I just want to say one thing as it is. I want to enable people that have burning questions to ask them. Okay, Rabbi?
What?
The rabbis want to ask some questions about the class too.
Okay. go ahead.
Yes, there's... Okay.
Just an observation that so many of us deal with issues of theodicy, if I could use those terms. Thank you. We so often in our professional lives and in our personal lives deal with issues of theodicy as it's classified, I guess. Would you say that when the typical, if someone comes to us and says, for instance, what did I do? If I did X, Y, Z and it produced this result, look how I'm suffering, how so-and-so is suffering, that in effect it is almost an innocent, granted, but an innocent posture of hubris, that somehow I have such power that because I did such and such, I caused this horrible thing to happen.
I would say that any person that says that because the mezuzah in your house wasn't located in the right place and the text of the mezuzah wasn't the right text, and as a result, something bad happened, or because you said this perek b'Tehillim, as a result something good happened, that is not tefillah, that's iyun tefillah. That's not an expression of being, that's not monotheism, that's magic. And I'm saying that because we all know that that is still a large living part of our life. And monotheism is a harder way to overcome the temptation of magic, because overcoming the temptation of magic is overcoming the seduction of control, of illusion of control. And this world is terrifying. Yes, Rabbi.
Arnie, here. I'm connecting this phenomenal shiur, for which I thank you tremendously, with one that you taught in a previous seminar on the issue of power. And there you taught us about Shabbat and Peah. And I'm thinking that this is in the same kav, that our monotheistic religion that teaches us to relinquish control over time, Shabbat, and to relinquish control over space, Peah, that this is connected to maybe it's the practice or the praxis side. You breed a monotheistic mindset by practicing Shabbat as letting go of control of time, and you letting go of control of space.
I would say I want to speak about this a little bit more tomorrow. I want to say something because this also answers a remark of Hartman. That there's a strong connection between this idea and halakha. I thank you for this remark. A strong connection. The idea that there's kedusha in this world. If we translate it in light of the way we conceptualize kedusha today, means that there's islands that you can't control within our world. And those islands are created by halacha. In halacha, we practice losing control. What is Shabbat about? Shabbat's an attempt to practice losing control. That's the Shabbat in light, the Shabbat in Dvarim. For example, Shabbat, you mentioned Shabbat. In Dvarim, not in Shmot. How is it expressed there? Why are we supposed to lanuach? I just want to follow this one pasuk here. This is very helpful. Toda rabba. Leman yanuach avdeicha ve'amatcha kamocha. Let's say that again. Shabbat is a mitzvah that you're supposed to perform. Why? Leman yanuach avdeicha ve'amatcha kamocha. Now there's a lot assumed here. One of the things that we have here, who's the mitzvah in this Shabbat? Think about it for a minute. Who's the mitzvah? Leman yanuach avdeicha ve'amatcha kamocha. So who's the mitzvah? The Adon. You're only a mitzvah if you have avdecha ve'amatcha, right? And what is the mitzvah? It's not a mitzvah to rest. What's the mitzvah? To allow other people to rest. So it's not lanuach, it's lehaniach. And finally, Shabbat is about kamocha, meaning it's about temporary collapse of all social hierarchy. There's no power structure in Shabbat. There's no one in control in Shabbat. It's one day of absolute equality. It's not Marxism. There is a Motzei Shabbat. There is a power structure. But it's one day where all collapses. That's the meaning of Kedushat Shabbat. It's a time where you lose control, where you can't control. And here's a question. Is, let's say, Shabbat an expression of monotheism? Or is it something else? Or is it monotheism, not an idea, but it's a state of mind that's cultivated through halacha? It's cultivated through halacha. This is a good place to introduce a great idea of Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong, which I love her writings about religion, and she has one observation that really takes James and all the rest of the guys to one step forward. She says that religion, what is religion? What is religion? So is religion like Hillel Halkin has this observation that philosophy is about what you think, and religion is about what you believe, and Judaism is about what you do, echoing something you said before. Armstrong has this interesting thing. It's not about what you believe. It's not about what you think. It's not about what you do. Religion is a talent. It's a talent. It's a talent. It's a talent. Like they're musicians. They have a talent. They could hear things I can't hear and think about. And artists can imagine things I can't even start to imagine. Religious people are talented people. There's a specific talent. And religion is about cultivating that talent. And what is the religious talent? Religious talent, now tapping into an observation of William James, is your ability to sense a presence of what's absent. That's religion. To sense a presence of what's absent. William James, and Rabbi, you encouraged me to read William James, so this is all your fault. I'm serious. But William James, what is it? The presence of the absent is when you have a feeling that evaporates very quickly. But it's a moment. It's a feeling that you feel the presence of something. And you can't understand that presence. You can't conceptualize it with your mind. You can't capture it with your senses. So therefore, it's not there, because with all our channels of understanding, it's not there. Not with my senses, not with my mind, it's not there. And yet, it's there. You feel it. That's a religious, that's a religious experience, and talented people can tap into those feelings. You said I'm a spiritual person before, David. I kind of feel like I'm crippled when it comes to religious talent. That this is not accessible to me. But I do believe that there's talent out there. And there's talent, and where there's talents, there are athletes. There are athletes. That when we speak about hitting a boundary and sensing something that's beyond our boundaries, there is a talent of yearning, of sensing something. And I think our religion at its best cultivates that sense that there's what's beyond you. At its worst, gives you the illusion that everything is within your grasp, that everything is under your control. And our religion also cultivates both, and I think Shabbat is a great example of an attempt to halacha to let us practice losing control, not being the one in control. Avdecha, a class of social structure, a day of not controlling. And since I can't control time, and our time is kind of over,